Did you know that originally, the Honing Stone Barrier add-on was deemed too overpowered by the devs, so they decided to introduce on August 2016 one of the weirdest mechanics in Dead by Daylight. The Honing Stone only had a 50% chance of downing a survivor once they stepped on a bear trap. This meant that this add-on was completely unpredictable, as you could be lucky and have the survivors downed, or you could be unlucky and have them escape with no scratch. This add-on nerf stayed in the game for almost 2 years, as it was only changed to be 100% on the 24th of July on patch 2.1.0. This is just one example of the weirdest gameplay balance choices the devs have made in the past, and in this video I have decided to compile 25 random balance facts that only veterans will remember. Let me know in the comments how many of them you remember yourself. When DBD released, the Wraith didn't come with any bell animation, as the devs didn't have time to implement it by the release of the game. The bell was added in December of 2016, 6 months after the release date. But did you know that originally, the Wraith also started the match uncloaked? This meant that you had to spend your time cloaking so you became invisible, and this also gave a warning to every survivor in the match that you were a Wraith, because by this time, the bell sound was still global, meaning that anyone in the map could hear your bell just like the Bone Clapper add-on does. Out of all the original trio of characters, Hillbilly was the only one that did not receive any significant changes to his base kit during 4 years, up until patch 4.1.0. This meant that Hillbilly had a perfect design that was basically ruined by overheating and the add-on nerfs, and this also means that in reality, the Hillbilly got shafted harder than the pig ever has. The only interesting change he got during those 4 years was that the chainsaw collide sound was originally global. He could flick his chainsaw at the end of a chainsaw sprint, which was called the flick, but it was quickly patched as it was considered unintended behavior by the devs. Most of you probably know that the nurse originally had 3 blinks base kit, and that she could have 5 blinks total. But what most people don't know is that she was actually more busted than that. She used to walk at 4 meters per second, which is the survivor running speed, so she was not slower and not faster than a survivor like she is now. And she also didn't have the light burn effect, which allowed survivors to stun the nurse or prevent her from using the power while a flashlight was shining on her body. It's funny how after almost 6 years, the devs finally decided to remove this nerf that they added way back in the days. Did you know that the tier 1 ability of Myers predates the existence of the Undetectable status effect? Before this status condition even existed, Myers instead had a 6-meter terror radius, and funnily enough, he was completely undetectable by Spine Chill and Premonition, which was an exclusive and unique effect that only applied to him. This made original Myers very scary, because not even Spine Chill will tell you if he was stalking you, and actually, some of the community complained that the Undetectable status effect was actually a nerf to Michael Myers. The Huntress was the first character that introduced a lullaby mechanic that would be later used for Freddy, Trickster, and Sadako, which explains where the name itself comes from, since the Trickster and Sadako's creepy sounds do not sound like a lullaby at all. But what many people don't know is that when she first came out, the lullaby was directional, so you knew from what direction the Huntress was coming. This was an intentional design choice, since she had a range attack that could injure from afar, so it was fair to give survivors a warning of where she was coming from. This was later removed in 2019 with the Freddy rework, and instead it was made omnidirectional for everyone. Recently, the hack got a new mechanic update where survivors can remove her traps by interacting with it, which is really cool in all honesty. But did you know that this is the second gameplay mechanic that was added to her base kit for survivors to counterplay her? What if I told you that the first mechanic introduced in April of 2017 was actually the ability of survivors to crouch on her traps so they are not activated? You heard me right. This was not something that came with the hack, and instead it was added 4 months after as a measure to counterplay her, since she was extremely powerful at defending hooks hex totems, and generators. The Doctor was originally completely different, and talking about the many changes would take an entire video, which I already have in my channel, so if you're interested, I will leave the link down in the description. As a spoiler of that video, in case you don't wanna watch it, originally Doctor had a very rare add-on that applied the exhausted status effect to any survivors on tier 3 madness. I think if this add-on came back to the game, it would be a very good counter to Death Heart. And the same thing with the Doctor is applied to Leatherface, as he was a rushed character that was released out of nowhere. If you're interested in the curious case of Leatherface and his rushed development cycle, I have another video ready that I will link in the description as well. Freddy Krueger, to this date, is the only character that had a complete rework to their power, true to the meaning of the word. His original power was completely different, and it is the worst power that has ever existed in Dead by Daylight. If he were to be released today on the same state he was back then, he would be the first ever character that is F tier. If you're interested in me covering and showcasing how his power works, make sure to leave your support and I will be working on it in the future. The pig had a very interesting change in the past that most people probably don't even remember. Originally, she had a 28 meters terror radius, which was unique because she was the only 4.6 speed killer that had a different terror radius. This was later removed on January 2019 in order to standardize it to the rest. But the interesting thing is that nowadays, there are some characters that have unconventional terror radius like Slinger who has 32 meters or Wesker with 40. So in all honesty, this nerf should have been reverted by now. Did you know that when the clown was first released, he used to be slowed down by throwing bottles? This made him clunky to play as, so the devs removed this speed penalty and he became better to use. What is interesting is that this change predates the clown rework that he got 8 months after this buff, so this could mean that potentially the devs have been working on the rework for 8 months total, or that this buff was the start of the rework idea itself. It seems like they have done the same mistakes with Freddy and Skull Merchant, as using their secondary power slows them down, which shouldn't be the case as proven with the clown, since their powers do not injure directly the survivors. The spirit originally kept her collision while phasing, which meant that she could collide with someone which told her where the survivors are. Obviously, this mechanic was used by all spirit players and even survivors in order to detect her location while she was phasing, and this was later removed as part of the spirit's early changes. If you want to recreate the power that this mechanic gave you, there is currently a very rare add-on that gives killer instinct whenever you collide with someone while phasing, and you can see just how broken and strong this mechanic was back in the days. Back when the Plague first released, she used to not have any corrupt purge fountains available at the start of the match. This meant that as long as survivors didn't cleanse themselves, you could not get the corrupt purge power, leaving you as a M1 character. This is where the don't cleanse against plague tactics comes from, because you could actually leave her powerless. This made one of her add-ons, the Apple add-ons that gave her a fountain for free, to be a must use in every match if you wanted to get corrupt purge at least once. Of course, the devs saw that this was possible, so they buffed her by adding a corrupt purge fountain at the start of every match, and this is why she has one to this day. The Ghostface had a very interesting gameplay mechanic when he was first released that was quickly patched on the next hotfix, as it was unintended by the devs. Whenever you stalked someone who was already exposed, you could refill the stalk meter back to the maximum. This meant that you could potentially keep a single survivor exposed for the entire match duration as long as you kept stalking them and refilling their exposed meter. This was, of course, busted, as it made various add-ons that extended the exposed meter useless, which was further proof that this was an unintended mechanic. It almost seems impossible to believe that back originally, Pyramid Head was supposed to see the aura of caged survivors so you immediately knew where they spawned. Obviously, This led to tunneling and camping plays, not only because the camping mechanic of Pyramid Head was yet to be implemented, but also because caging a survivor disabled burrow time or decisive strike, so you had no penalty or drawbacks, and instead it was pure reward. In my personal opinion, if this change were to be still in the game, Pyramid Head would be one of the strongest and most easy characters to use and most painful character to go against. Luckily, it seems like out of all the changes in this video, the devs hit the nail perfectly with the Executioner, although if you're good, you could still camp and tunnel survivors if you so desire. Since this is more of a recent rework for that Slinger, I just wanted to show how incredibly quick you used to aim with him back when he was still new, and now that I am used to the actual speeds in game, it's hard to believe that this was the speed that the devs wanted that Slinger to aim with. It's even faster than Call of Duty, and COD is already pretty fast. Do you think they should have kept this in the game, or are you glad that this was slowed down to be a more realistic feeling? Not much has changed from the Oni, a character that in my opinion is also one of the best designed characters in DBD, just like the Plague, Huntress or original Hillbilly. The only interesting fact I could find is that originally his Blood Fury animation was different, and instead of both hands, he clenched his fist. Did you know that when the Demogorgon first released, he didn't have the power to shred pallets and breakable walls with his shred attack? This was exclusive to an iridescent add-on, the Red Moss, so it was highly used as it completely changed the playstyle of Demogorgon into a more active one. Seeing a demo collide with a pallet and not break it seems cursed to think about nowadays. But anyways, out of all the changes in this video, this was the one that changed the fastest. As a hotfix later, the devs decided to add the pallet breaking mechanic as base kit due to how highly requested it was, and the Red Moss add-on was changed into, in my opinion, one of the worst iridescent add-ons that has ever existed, probably because the effect was rushed in. And another character that had almost the same fate is the Blight. We all know the hide vision problems or the different add-ons effects he had, but what most people forget is that originally Blight was not able to break pallets with his rush attack, but unlike the Demogorgon, this was not part of any of his add-ons, not even the Compound 33, as that one makes the Blight break pallets when he collides with them, not when he does a rush attack. This was added with the same reasoning as the Demogorgon or even Oni during Blood Rush in order to make him more consistent and feel better to play as. The twins are probably some of the characters with the weirdest developer decisions ever, which makes you think of one of two things. Either the devs bite more than they could chew and they had no time to finish developing the twins, or the devs don't play Dead by Daylight, and something tells me it's the second option, because there is no way nobody in playtesting phase wouldn't notice that as a survivor you could take Victor hostage and it would leave Charlotte as a aim-1 character with one survivor less. This tactic was so popular back when she was unable to recall that to this day the terminology to take Victor hostage is still present as a tactic, even when you can recall Victor. Luckily, due to the amount of backlash this caused, the devs introduced this mechanic after live release, but with a massive cooldown requirement of 45 seconds. Out of all characters released in a DLC chapter, the Trickster was the first one to receive a substantial change after his release, proving that he was a problematic design just like the Knight and the Skull Merchant would become. Originally, the Trickster had to hit 8 times instead of 6, his main event activation time was longer than it is now, and he also for some reason had a random spread pattern when throwing knives, which made long range hits almost impossible to aim with, and it depended on pure luck. Of course, since Trickster had to hit less knives now, his total ammo count decreased from 60 to 44. Imagine throwing 60 knives in a single charge. Thinking about it nowadays sounds wild. There are way more specific and niche details about this slight change that Trickster received, so if you're interested on a full video, let me know in the comments as well. Nemesis currently is in a very good state in my opinion, where he is not that strong and not that weak either, and it's also easy to get his mutation rate going, and at the same time it's not brain dead. However, most people probably forgot, a lot of people were dissatisfied with the tier 3 mutation state as it only increased the length of the tentacle strike for 1 meter. So the maximum reward that the Nemesis got after contaminating survivors with the virus was only 1 extra meter of the tentacle, which was almost impossible to notice while in gameplay. The devs later in the next mid-chapter added an extra bonus, increased the speed while he is holding the tentacle, and combined with the extra length, that made tier 3 more worth to achieve as the final goal. Sometimes, thinking about these things makes me not surprised to see some of the development decisions that Behavior takes with the latest patches if they thought that 1 meter extra was enough of a reward for the ultimate Nemesis state. There are a lot of small changes that the Cenobite got for his kit that interest me a lot, but due to how TikTok has rotted the brains of viewers, instead I have decided to showcase a visual change that will provide instant gratification. Originally, the Lament configuration icon on the HUD was a square box just like the item itself, and this was changed to be round on the live release. Looking back at the square HUD, it makes sense why this was changed into a more nice to look at circle shape. Out of all the changes in this video, for me, this is the most shocking and most interesting. In the PTB of the artist, if you were surrounded by crows and you collided with the inactive crow that the artist placed, you would actually get injured. This meant that it was literally impossible to loop her as you would end up dead no matter what, which led to the only option being leaving the loops. So almost nothing has changed in the grand scale of things, but if you think about it, this could mean that the artist could trap survivors in the basement and instantly injure them just as they leave the stairs without having to activate the crows at all. In other words, as a survivor, you could walk to your death and end up downed just by walking. I am glad that this change was removed from her live release, and instead now if you collide with a crow, your repel progress is reset. And this is all the changes that I think are interesting. If you enjoy this type of video and you want to see more, show your support and I will be making a part 2 dedicated to more old niche features of the game. Thank you for watching and have a nice day.